Morning.
Shabbat shalom.
Hi, Liliana.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I can't complain.
Still enjoying nice weather down there?
It's really cold today. It was
What's cold? What's cold for Florida?
for here. It's cold though. I know. I'm from Canada. I know what cold.
I know.
Aside from that, I listen to radio every day, just like on the phone. I get it on the internet, so I hear the traffic reports, everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's been. They're worried about the what are those things? Iguanas or whatever they are. When it's cold, they can't move, so they fall out of the trees. It's hysterical. I mean, you have to be careful where you walk. It was on the news. Be aware that they just fall down.
Wow.
No, it's crazy because they're cold-blooded, so they need the sun, and if there isn't enough sun, they can't warm up. They don't warm up. They can't move.
Wow. Interesting.
It's so bizarre. I could just imagine you walking and then hit you in the head.
Iguanas.
That's not a pretty sight. They're big. They're about the size of a small cat,
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't want one falling on my head.
No, that could hurt a lot. Wow.
Yeah. Well, no. Anyway.
It's raining iguanas.
Really?
Yeah, there's all these warnings about that on the news yesterday.
So interesting. Hi, Brad.
Do we have a page? I'm trying to find the beginning of this. It's so annoying. This first of all, it goes like a book from left to right instead of right to left. So,
Well, yeah.
you would think they would have done it,
Well, but the program is such that you turn
Yeah,
pages. a certain
I
way.
know. Well, I've gotten used to that. It's just I can't always find it. Like
So it's page 192 in the blue.
192.
Yeah, I think that you have the blue numbers, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm up.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Matavu. Yeah.
192. Okay. Like I find for Kabbalat Shabbat, when you go after the Mishabera, I can never find it. I know it off by heart, but
Right.
I can never find it after that. I don't know where it is, or I'm okay until then. Nothing's perfect, right?
I mean, you could just buy the book and then you.
I bought it. I bought the Kindle book.
Okay, but you could just buy the book.
Another one?
What Siddur do you have, Liliana? What do you have?
It's a Kindle book. Like it's,
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But it goes the wrong way, number one. And number two, the pages are obviously different. So I get the Shabbat is where I have a problem because I don't know where the Mishaberach is or everything else that comes back at that point. So just have to find my way. Anyway, not to complain.
Well, here in the blue numbers, it would be 371.
What?
Well, the Mishaberach and the blue numbers, if her Kindle can play the blue numbers of our Siddur.
Right, she does. It does.
371. Okay.
371 is Mishaberach. Elenu in the blue numbers is 586. And the Mourner's Cottage.
I mean, most of this I know by heart. So.
Yeah, I know. Where is it? I've gone too far. Oh, the blue number is 598 for the Mourner's Cottage.
Okay, I made a note of it.
So if that helps.
Yeah, that will help.
Brad, I read in the newspaper this week someone singing the praises of your medical ability.
It was
oddly
3
enough,
words, I think.
in an obituary.
Yeah, 3 words in an obituary.
Yeah.
I'll actually take credit for that.
That's nice. I often see in the obituaries, which I check every now and then, they thank the doctors and individuals.
It's a new social media. It's called Dead Book.
Aye.
I check every now and then because I know, people in the community. So, but there's less and less.
Isn't that the line? I keep checking the obituaries to make sure I'm not there.
All right. What is it? The announcement of my death is overrated or something?
Actually, I was in New York City once and I opened the New York Times and my name was in the obituaries. It's like,
I worked with a lady. Remember Mrs. Frank? There was a Ray Frank in the obituary, and everybody came in and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear it." And she's standing there. And she says, "I'm not dead."
That's funny.
That's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, the rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated.
Exactly.
I had somebody once write an obituary a la Dr. Seuss. It was really quite amusing.
Did you keep it?
No.
That's cute.
Yeah, it was cute.
Rabbi, were there a couple of people last night that you had to delete from the comments section of the service?
I noticed there's a Greek one.
No,
Is that
she's,
what it was? It was Greek?
apparently she's Russian. When I copied the name and I posted it into Google and just did a search, it comes out with this sort of 30-something-year-old Russian woman.
Oh, okay. So
I
maybe
have no idea. I don't know what she's saying, so I didn't want to just,
Right.
you should ask Luba. Maybe she knows.
or ask Google Translate.
Oh yeah, that too.
I did, but it didn't come up with anything.
It could be somebody who's Jewish who just wants to listen to the.
That's fine. I mean, it's not the first time. She comes pretty much regularly now, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no way to kind of ask because how do you,
True.
Unless you post it with, well, whoever,
but she doesn't speak English.
well, then why would she be listening?
I can't tell you.
Well, maybe you could try Hebrew because,
Yeah.
the sentences are in English and Hebrew, and possibly she understands the Hebrew.
Yeah, I can do that. Try that.
Or somebody who knows Yiddish.
Yeah, that's possible too.
Other
Can I ask a question for both Rabbi and Brad? So if we're not having services in February, why is Gesher meeting? We're not having in-person services.
Yeah, it has to do with the populations.
Okay,
And that we've determined that the school is following the Mill Creek and Erie School District plan,
right,
which is their in-person now. And our service population
right,
is an older population and much more vulnerable.
okay,
He said it.
okay.
Are there other medical considerations in there?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, we have people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s dying from this, but most of the people who are unvaccinated or who are vaccinated that are dying are over the age of 75, and that sort of makes up our service population. Whereas the kids, we've had in Erie County, one teenager passed from COVID, unvaccinated. All of our kids are masked. All of our kids are doing as much social distancing as we can. And a lot of our kids are vaccinated. So the risk is much lower for our kids than it is for our service population.
Okay,
And I believe our teachers are all vaxxed.
right.
Yeah,
Alright.
I think our teachers are all vaxxed and boosted.
Yes, well.
Yeah. Well, I know you are, Pam, Corlin is, Edie is, Jessica is. And Jessica also got COVID, so that's a whole other whatever boost. Gabby works at the hospital, so I'm sure she is.
Mhm.
Kendra is for sure.
What about Erica?
Yeah. Yeah, with her father, are you kidding?
Oh, yeah, true, duh.
That's not.
I know.
My student Yael is vaccinated
Yeah.
and she still got COVID and she's a little kid even.
Yeah, I mean,
That was
they
the first
get
kid
them.
I-
I mean, so did Jessica's kids. Jessica Modette's kids all had it.
And they were all vaccinated too?
No, the younger ones weren't vaccinated.
Yeah. So strange.
But I mean, Yael is a kindergarten kid, and she was part of a trial, and she actually got the vaccine as part of this trial,
Mhm.
and then got COVID anyway. But I mean, I think that the trick is you get it at such a less severe version that it's completely worth it.
Hi, Corlin.
So, well, I think it's just us kids.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Good. So on page 74, although I'm tempted to sort of do something a little bit different than just a regular service.
Sure.
Perhaps something along the lines of kind of taking a look at some of the pieces of liturgy and digging into some of the meanings behind some of those pieces in place of a actual service experience. How do you feel about that?
That sounds good.
Okay. So it's a, you know, we can go anywhere with this. So are there particular parts of liturgy that you've sort of wondered about or thought about, or, you know, kind of would like to dig deeper into?
I have a question right off the bat with Mato Vu, because that seems to be right across the board. Every, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, whatever, that's what starts the prayer service. I mean, there may be some exceptions, but it seems to be a pretty common.
No, it's liturgically, that's the traditional service, right? Starting right there with Mato Vu.
Yeah.
Why did they pick that though? Good question.
Right. So the service itself, the structure of the prayer book that we have is although we like to think that it's ancient. It's really not. The structure dates back probably no more than 500 years or so. And it really was, if we go back to the experience pre the printing press, right? So the printing press is 15, whatever it is, right? Gutenberg. Prior to that, you had only manuscript documents. And manuscript documents were basically inaccessible for the rank and file, anybody, whatever. It cost, I think the statistic is it's about 1 year's worth of an average worker's salary for a book. So we're talking about a very expensive item, right? I mean, something that would be the equivalent of a house. And so, you only would have something that, the synagogue itself would have it, or the institution would have it. It would not be something that would be held by individuals, unless they were extraordinarily rich, which means that the manuscripts that we have that were in private hands were in the hands of very, very wealthy folks. And there are many manuscripts that are there. Many of them were commissioned works of art. You have illuminated manuscripts. You have especially sort of the shorter versions, like the Megillah, right? So you have the story of Esther, and it's done in a illuminated way. You have scrolls that are with pictures and all sorts of things all over them, which is not typical for a biblical text. But the Megillah seems to have that. Then you have these illuminated manuscripts of the Haggadah, the Passover Haggadah, which were very popular. But beyond that, most of the texts were simply written out text on parchment. Sometimes they're in scroll form, the manuscripts, and often they were in folios. But the evolution of the actual prayer service is such that things were much more fluid before we went and printed the book. So it was common for there to be a kind of accepted sort of pattern, but that the structure of it, or the content of it rather, would be flexible. And something like Ma Tovu sort of makes its way in there a little later. But by the time the prayer book is actually printed and largely disseminated, which is only a very short period of time after the invention of the printing press. I mean, by about 10 years after the press is invented, Jews are printing pocketbooks, which is fascinating, because the rest of the world is printing big institutional books, tomes that are used in church services or things like that. And the Jews are printing books that they can give out to everybody. It has to do with literacy rates and values of literacy within cultures and communities and such. But it's no good to have a book if you can't read it, and if your culture doesn't have a kind of emphasis on literacy, then there's no, you don't need the book. In addition, the whole structure of Christian, especially Christian textual understandings, is that the religious leadership will explain it to the folks, right? So it even today, it's not that same this sort of venue of, well, it could be this and it could be that, and oh, Rabbi, you're wrong, and that doesn't happen. In fact, one of my favorite things to do, I did this many times in Rochester, actually, was I had a friend who was a priest, and I would fill in for him when he needed somebody to do Bible study. And the folks there, were sort of expecting to be told what the text means. And I was giving them all these different options and midrash and all of this, and they were quite confused by the whole thing. But fun.
You know, in regards to that, you know, back in the 70s, there was a murder case in Erie, and the guy who was killed, they're trying to figure out who this guy was and what the motive for the murder could have been. But I remember one of the things that the police came up with when they were trying to figure out a profile for this guy. They said he was Catholic, and he read the Bible every day. Therefore, he was a religious fanatic because he studied the scriptures. And in Catholicism, Catholics don't do that. The priest tells them what it's about. And so they said this guy had to have been a religious fanatic because of that.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at our naive selves about what religious fanaticism was and is. Little did we know what was to come, right? Right. So, you know, this text comes to us, it's a very common construction where it pulls initially from a biblical story. Right. That first section, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. That line comes right out of Numbers. I think it's Numbers. Well, here it is. Numbers 24:5. Okay, and then you add in different pieces of text to create a kind of whole that hangs together. Right. So then you add in something from Psalm 5, and then something from Psalm 26, and then something from Psalm 69. And it's a bit like a patchwork, right? You're pulling this reference and this reference and this reference and that reference, and you're kind of making it all work. Right. So when you put it all together, how fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. I, through your abundant love, enter your house. I bow down in awe at your holy temple. Adonai, I love your temple abode, the dwelling place of your glory. I will humbly bow down low before Adonai, my maker. As for me, may my prayer come to you, Adonai, at a favorable time, O God, in your abundant faithfulness. Answer me with your sure deliverance. And so they've woven this text together to talk about where we are, right? The idea of being or creating a house and a place for God. And then you get to all the sort of allusions to it, right? So you've got this idea of a house, or a place, a dwelling. So you look at the first one, which is Ohalecha, your tents. And you think about all the different tents within Jewish tradition. What's the first one that comes to mind?
Abraham's tent, our house, a chuppah.
Right, you just go biblically, right? You've got Abraham's tent, in which Abraham welcomes the strangers.
Right.
You have Sarah's tent that her son Isaac welcomes Rebecca into.
Right.
And that has a healing presence. Right. Remember, he's healed after he brings Rebecca into his mother Sarah's tent.
Right.
You have the tents that they dwelled in as they wandered through the desert. You have all of those kinds of things. And then you have the actual story of Balaam and Balak, which is being told, retold this right here. Right. The idea that the sorcerer is called on by the king of Moab, Balak, and Balaam is this non-Jewish kind of local sorcerer guy, and he's brought in, and he's brought in to curse the Israelites. And what happens when he tries to do that? God says, they're under my protection. Right. So then there's this whole sense of of God protecting. And then you move into the Psalms, you know, that relate covering temple, home, protector, you know, all of that into God's house. And what's God's house? Of course, is the ancient temple in Jerusalem, and a dim sort of reflection of that is our synagogue spaces. So, and basically the message I think here is, we as Jews create sacred space wherever we gather.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if it's in a tent, in a house, in a place, in a temple, wherever. God's there to protect us, right? God was there to protect us in the desert and the tents. God's protecting us in the temple. God's protecting us, you know, whatever. And I think that's why it sort of is a good beginner to start place to start for the what we know as the morning blessings, or part of the service.
That was interesting. Thank you. Wow.
And what's nice actually about this prayer book is that when it has these composite prayers that were taken from this piece and that piece and whatever, they're actually listed out on the bottom.
Right.
On the bottom of that page, they're actually listed out there. So, you know, it's actually quite a nice sort of study piece, because in most other prayer books, you don't have that kind of reference. And so you just think it's there, and you don't know which sections are from where. Okay, where else are we going?
Let me ask you a question. You had mentioned that what we have as our prayer book, or the order of service or whatever, is only about, I think you said 500 years old or so. Well, I hear every once in a while that the prayer service is set up to parallel or to imitate the services in the temple. So is that something that is factual, or is that something that's just been placed on it afterwards?
So there were morning, afternoon, and evening sacrifices.
Okay.
And there was the recitation of the Shema morning and evening, for sure. And that was part of it. And so in that sense, it kind of follows that pattern.
Okay.
But it's not the synagogue service does not bear any resemblance to the sacrificial.
Okay.
Right. Beyond, you know, recitation of the Shema and maybe a few other pieces that were kind of there, but not in the way that we have them today. even in a traditional service.
Yeah.
And by the way, the service itself is not was not something that was, you know, universally accepted. Well, it still isn't, right? There are vast differences between the service that exist in, and I'm not even talking about the different movements, but just geographically, the service of the Jews of Italy is different than the service of the Jews of Germany, of Poland, of France, I mean, they follow the general sort of rubrics, but the individual contents are very different, because, you know, you had that sort of baseline, and then every community started adding their own thing to it. So the Jews of Italy wrote fantastic liturgical poetry, as you might imagine. And they're called piyutim, and they are sonnets and poems and love stories and all sorts of great stuff. There actually is some Italian Jewish poetry that if you read it, it is poetry in Italian, but if you break up the syllables differently, it's also poetry in Hebrew.
Wow.
Now, somebody's got to have a lot of time on their hands for that.
Wow.
So the service as written in the prayer book is X number of pages long with X number of passages, English, Hebrew, etc., and so forth. If you were to cut it down to bare bones and you had to rush through a service, what are the absolute pieces that have to be included? Because I've never, we always do certain things all the time, but what has to be included to make it a kosher service?
Are we talking in a traditional setting?
I'm talking in our Reform congregation.
Well, our
Traditional
Reform-
setting, it's the whole thing, every page, every word.
Well, no, not necessarily. And actually, it's been interesting over the last couple of years where the traditional, even in the traditional community, where they were gathering in person and they didn't want to gather for very long because of the COVID threats. And so they cut down to the minimum amount necessary.
So what is the minimum amount necessary?
Right. So, there's this whole preparatory service that we have here, right? That is sort of get ready stuff.
Right.
In order to fulfill your obligation, yeah, you have to do the Shema and the Amida,
I was gonna say that.
Oh.
Yeah.
right? And I mean, it depends on what the circumstances are, right? There's no clear answer to this, right? Because if somebody is chasing after you and your life is threatened, then you can do this. If you came into the synagogue late and you weren't there for the first part of it, you can do that, but you can't plan to be late. But if you happen to be late, then you can do it this way. But if you plan to be late, then you just can't fulfill your obligations.
We are so different from Catholics.
Right. I mean, that's it, so, I mean, even I talked last night about some, reproductive rights stuff. And, there isn't anything in Judaism that is clear cut, right? I mean, everything is based on circumstances and this possibility and that possibility and this thing and that thing. And, we have all these different, mitigating circumstances, if you will. But basically, if you're at home, for instance, and you're not in a community, right? You would do this preparatory service, you would say the Shema, you would say the Amida to yourself, and that's it. If you're in a community, a minyan, then you can add in the other pieces that demand minyan participation. So things like Chatzi Kaddish, Barchu, the repetition of the Amidah in a traditional service, Elenu, Kaddish. You can say Kaddish by yourself, but you, if you're in the midst of Kaddish, if you're saying Kaddish on a regular basis, you can say it by yourself, but you have to say it alone. And if it's of course advised to be in a minyan setting.
To be honest, I missed services last night because I was in a funeral, and I did say Kaddish to myself when the Monsignor got done with his service.
Yeah, I mean, funerals at night.
It was a 5:30 service. Got done about 6:30.
No burial then, right?
It was an urn, so the urn will be buried at some point. But so, Craig, did you know that there only had to be two parts of a service?
No.
Okay,
No.
me either.
Well, and it's not exactly like that. You can't say there's only two parts of like.
Yeah, but you get stamped as having participated if you get the two parts done.
As long as you couldn't do it another way.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's
once again, the circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, it.
So if you were doing bare bones at the temple on a Friday night, what would you include?
So look, what has come to be sort of bare bones when we want to have a quick service at camp, okay, kind of a thing, is opening song, Baruch Shema, Mi Chamocha, Amidah. The first part of the Amidah then goes silent, Elenu and Kaddish. Right, that's the, that the, the Moray authority on what's required for, but again, other people make different, decision points, right? Some people would say, you don't have to do Elenu and Kaddish. You can just end at the Amidah.
I'm glad I asked the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also has to do with community norms, right? So different communities work in different ways. When I was for a brief period of time, I was helping with a conservative congregation when I was a Hilla director. And that meant, a full davening kind of a thing. Just a very different style. But they did they went through so their Amidah was Avot Gevurot Kedusha, and then they went silent, and everybody did the rest of it by themselves, and then picked up after.
Can we talk a minute about the meaning of the Elenu?
Sure. So 282.
And the reason I ask, because of course the very end, on that day, Adonai will be one and God's name will be one. Well, before that, Adonai will be sovereign over all the earth. So I interpret this to mean that, I guess our desire is that all people, regardless of religion, will recognize that there's one God. Is that what we're saying?
So the Elenu is probably the most particularistic prayer. And if you look at it in an Orthodox prayer book, it basically says, if only those ignorant non-Jews would wake up and smell the coffee, then they would realize that Judaism is the one true answer to the world. And if they would just agree to that, then the world will be perfected and we could all live happily ever after. And over the course of the centuries, there have been parts of the Elenu that were actually excised. Because the Jewish community felt that it was too particularistic. Things like, and they bow down to emptiness and vanity. Meanwhile,
gods that hear not.
Sorry?
Like gods that hear not. That's another line from an Orthodox.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have an Art Scroll Siddur, they have the full text and they have it in brackets and whatever that they pull it out. So we flipped it on its head and created this very beautiful English that said, let us adore the ever-living God and render praise unto you, who spread out the heavens and established the earth, whose glory is revealed in the heavens above, whose greatness is manifest throughout the world. You are a God, there is none else. And this was kind of and if you grew up in a Reformed synagogue in the 60s and 50s and 40s and whatever, you probably remember the English, let us adore the ever-living God and render praise unto him who spread out the heavens and right? Yeah. Oh, I know. But we actually took all of that uncomfortable particularistic stuff out. rewrote the thing,
Mhm.
which is why you have several versions of it.
Mm.
Okay.
Right? That's why you have several versions. So the first one here is the rewritten one. I believe that's the one that actually comes in from the Old Union Prayer Book.
We're talking about the top of page 282.
Yes,
Okay.
right. I believe that one comes in from the first older, Union Prayer Book. Actually, let me look. Hold on. I think I have one.
If he doesn't, I do. He goes left, he goes right.
What's your cat's name?
This one is Crow.
Cute.
He came with the name Crow Feather, and we decided just to cut it to Crow. That's one of 4 that are running around here right now.
Okay, so this is actually the Union Prayer Book, one of the first editions from 1895.
Wow.
Used to belong to Max Rosenthal.
I think mine's the 1934 edition. So you
That's
got
the
me. You got me
revised.
beat. You got me beat.
So let me see if we can find it here. Morning service for the Sabbath, page 55. By the way, it says here, minister.
Mm.
Okay, so here, this is the Elenu.
Okay.
Okay, so you have 2 English paragraphs,
Uh-huh.
and the only thing that you have in Hebrew is va'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. We bow our head and bend our knee to magnify the King of Kings, the Holy One, the ever blessed.
I used to think Lifnei Melech meant lift your head up because that's when you stood up after bowing.
Right. Lifnei means before, and Melech is ruler.
Well, I know that now. It was king.
Okay.
But when I was a little kid, I used to try.
Right.
It's like Lifnei Melech. It's like that's my cue to stand up. It must be lift your head
Well,
up.
yeah, because it's you went va'anachnu korim and you bow, and then lifnei melech, you're up.
Exactly. So I thought that was my cue. So I, in my head, lift your head up.
So here's the English. You ready? Let us adore the ever-living God and render praise unto him who spread out the heavens and established the earth, whose glory is revealed in the heavens above, and whose greatness is manifest throughout the world. He is our God, and there is none else. We bow our head and bend our knee and magnify the King of Kings, the Holy One, the ever blessed. And then it says choir and congregation. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. Congregation sitting now. May the time not be distant, O God, when thy name shall be worshipped over all the earth, when unbelief shall disappear and error be no more, We fervently pray that the day may come upon which all men shall invoke thy name, when corruption and evil shall give way to purity and goodness, when superstition shall no longer enslave the minds, nor idolatry blind the eyes, when all inhabitants of the earth shall perceive that to thee alone every knee must bend and every tongue give homage. Oh, may all created in thine image recognize that they are brethren, so that they, one in spirit and one in fellowship, may be forever united before thee. Then shall thy kingdom be established on earth, and the word of thine ancient seer be fulfilled. The eternal alone shall rule forever and ever. Aye. Congregation, on that day the eternal shall be one, and his name shall be one.
Boy, that one section's a very PC way of saying they bow to vanity and pray to gods that hear not. So 1800s political correctness.
No, it wasn't political. It was rewriting theology.
Right. Well, I know that.
It wasn't. They were not being polite. They didn't know. They didn't care. It's important though. They were reinterpreting this text completely. They weren't trying to hide the fact that this is what they were trying to rewrite the whole text. They were trying to rewrite it as this universal message on the other end of a completely particularistic prayer.
But they're still saying that Jews are different than everyone else. Are they not? It's
Sure.
not universal.
Well, I mean, you know, it's not necessarily totally universal, but it's far from
Yes.
it's far from bowing down to emptiness and nothingness.
Right. Yes, it is. Yeah.
You know, I mean, why did they pick that piece of Hebrew? Right?
What was your question? Say that again. What was your
I mean,
question?
they picked 2 lines of Hebrew, well, 1 sentence basically,
Right.
versus the Revised Version. Hold on.
He's getting into this.
Oh, we're gonna have him so psyched for Torah study.
The Revised Version, which is from 1961, and
Well, that was a good year.
just very interestingly enough, this one has his name Max Rosenthal in it, and this one by 1961, you have somebody who's actually taking Hebrew and writing their name in Hebrew. It's a fascinating, you know, shift there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so in this one, we have the same text, the same Hebrew line, okay? Except we've added in Bayom Hahu at the end. So, anyway. But basically, this text of the Union Prayer Book is the text that our tradition, used from, the the early part of the late part of the 1800s all the way through 1973 or 4.
A long time.
Yeah, very long time. And then that prayer book we used only from the late 70s to the middle of the 90s. Then there was an interim prayer book, a little thin thing, gender sensitive version,
Right.
affectionately known as Gates of Gray. It didn't have a name. It was, or Gates of Sensitivity was, was the other name. But then, that was replaced eventually with Mishkan Tefillah.
And some of us poor congregations used Union Prayer Book into the mid 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Because we couldn't afford new prayer books until the mid 80s.
Oh, yeah. I mean, many congregations did that. I mean, it also had to do with the durability of the book.
Those little books survived everything, Rabbi.
Uh-huh.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
They had the blue version, the green version, the black version. So there are multiple different colors over the years.
Yeah, that was just a printing thing. They didn't really.
Oh, see, I thought there were different. There were different subtle changes during the period of time. It was just.
Well, it was revised significantly in the 30s, I believe, and some of the language was changed, and things like minister were taken out, and rabbi was put in, and that kind of thing. So there were significant changes that happened then. And then there were a few changes that happened post-war, but not much. And there were a whole bunch of things that got like stuck into it. They would send these like pasties, and you would stick them into the book.
Oh, boy.
Or you glue them in, which was always a disaster because then the pages would stick together. And it would be like off kilter and whatever. So,
Well,
hello,
thank
Joel.
you.
Shabbat shalom.
This is very interesting.
Yes.
Hi, Joel.
We are doing a little bit of tefillah or prayer study, looking at some of the texts of
Yeah,
our-
sorry I'm late.
You're fine. Is there a purpose for the Hatzi Kaddish other than
Yes.
just breaking up the service?
So it's liturgical punctuation. Because
So it breaks up the service.
Yeah, exactly. It lets you know that there are a number of different Kaddish iterations throughout the text, throughout the service, right? And they're used at different times to indicate the end of one section of service and the beginning of another. So there's one at the end of the first, the preparatory service of the morning blessings that ends that and then begins Baruch Hu. There's another one at the end of the Amidah section and then begins the Torah service. There's one at the end of the Torah service that would begin Musaf. There's one, and they're a little bit different, each one. And then there are versions that are dedicated to different themes. So there's Kaddish Darabanan, which means our Kaddish of honoring our teachers. Kaddish Yatom, which is the mourner's Kaddish. There is actually a burial Kaddish, which is done only at the time of burial, which honestly I've never used or seen used, actually. It's just not something that any community really has done. Even the traditional communities don't use it.
But when we say Kaddish at the funeral, we're not saying the funeral Kaddish?
No, when we use Kaddish typically when we do Kaddish at a funeral, we use memorial Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish.
Okay.
Right, but there is an actual burial Kaddish that is used or that is written. But again, I'm trying to think because I did a number of funerals with the Orthodox rabbi in Ottawa, and I don't remember. I don't think he did it. I think he did the mourner's Kaddish.
Well, I can see how it could be awkward. You're at a funeral, you want things to go smoothly, and suddenly you throw in a monkey wrench with a prayer that people are starting to go thinking they know it, and it's all wrong. I think that would be awkward at a funeral.
The worst part about it is that it would be one thing if it started off completely differently, but it's all the same. And then it's got about 2 lines in the middle, which are totally different, right? So That's going to throw everybody off.
Okay, cool.
But the different iterations of it are there to kind of help us end one section and begin another.
Thanks. All right, so stupid question. Should we do the Shema and the Amidah so we have an official service?
Sure.
Here we go.
Are you doing it for your Buffalo Bills? You're doing Warner's Cottage?
No, I'm actually perfectly content with that. But
Why do some people stand for the Shema and other people don't? And is there a right or wrong?
Well, right or wrong is an interesting term, right? So the tradition is actually that you would, so let me go back. The pinnacle of the Christian service is the statement of faith. When the early reformers recreated the service and they eliminated repetitions and they eliminated all sorts of parts of it and everything else, they really wanted it to shift from the traditional Jewish center of the service, which was the repetition of the Amidah, into something that was more recognizable by the secular community. And so they elevated the Shema from this fairly sort of preparatory faith statement that you said kind of along the way up the mountain before you got to the Amidah at the very top, right? And they elevated the Shema into the central prayer. The most important prayer in the service became the Shema. So if you grew up in a Reformed synagogue, you know, the rabbi would make a big deal out of, now we join together in the watchword of our faith, Shema Yisrael. And so we read it in English, we read it in Hebrew, and then we sang it in Hebrew. You know, so you had it all three, you know. And of course, one of the ways that you show that something is important is to stand up. And so it was, the tradition became that you stood for the Shema. But in traditional settings, I have something in my eye. Okay, sorry. In traditional settings, one would sit. And remain seated. In fact, there's a whole conversation in the Talmud about, do you sit, do you stand? And basically the Talmud says, in whatever position you start, you should continue. So if you're saying it standing up because you are, that's what you're doing right at the moment, you're saying the Shema, stay standing for the whole thing, including V'ahavta and whatever. Because V'ahavta is part of Shema.
Right.
Right. We think of it more as Shema, V'ahavta, whatever, but it's really the same. It's really part of that same rubric. And actually the Talmud goes into a whole thing that, you know, if you happen to be sitting in a tree, you should remain there and finish the Shema and then come down. Because there's a whole the debate in the Talmud about what time you should say the Shema. And that's actually where many people begin their Talmud study.
That's where it starts.
With the conversation about when is it time to say the Shema? That's a traditional Talmud argument. And it goes into this very long, complicated thing about timing and how time is calculated in the ancient world, and watches, and that you can say the beginning of this watch and not the end of that watch, and you know, it goes through. So page 114 or page 232.
The blue.
Hmm?
In the blue. Or for Liliana,
232, right?
232.
232. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. And Eric, just to not frighten you that we're only at the Shema and it's already 11 o'clock.
How you feeling, by the way, from the COVID?
Fine, totally fine.
That's great.
And Sue?
Also totally fine. She'll be here in a minute.
Good.
So we just had a conversation about services and liturgy, and we were just doing the Shema to wrap up.
Good. Oh, this is gonna be a long session.
Yeah. We're here till 3 o'clock, don't worry. It's like, the new rabbi shows up and says, how long should I speak on Shabbat? They say, well, Rabbi, you can talk as long as you like, but we leave at noon.
That's good.
No. And then, if we skip over to the Amidah, at least this one line, which I think is really leading us into a moment of silent reflection and meditation, which is Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open our lips, allow us the courage to speak, so that our mouths can declare your praise. Give us that insight.
Why do we change it from glory to praise?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I mean, oh Lord, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your glory
So it's
forever.
Adonai sefatai tiftach. Adonai, open my lips. Ufi yagid, so that my mouth can declare tehilatecha, your praise.
Okay, so it was glory forever when I
Yeah.
was growing up, and then new prayer book.
What's the difference between praise and glory?
That's why I'm trying to figure out why they changed the word. It's what politically correct mind said glory wasn't good.
It wasn't.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't. Glory was probably in the time that they wrote it, just more poetic for them.
Okay.
But
Remember, the early reformers were more concerned about poetry than they were about anything else.
Okay. Because
But
I can't
praise-
wrap my hand around praise when I'm trying to sing it. It always goes to glory.
Yeah.
Because when you're praising, it's enunciation from the person who's doing the prayer to God, you would think, saying, here's your praise, blah, blah, blah. But glory, I think, is something that's already been.
That makes sense. Well, thank you, Rabbi. That was really
That was
interesting.
Very
That was
interesting.
a great,
That was a good hour. Thank you.
that was
Yes.
good. We should do that again sometime.
Sure.
I've told people, go on YouTube to Tovia Singer, Rabbi Tovia Singer, who did a Jewish outreach. It's amazing. This guy who's a scholar in both Old and New Testament. It's absolutely incredible. Just listen to him sometimes.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work.
Yeah, he tries to prevent missionaries from converting Jews.
Yeah.
And as I said, he can recite every passage, both from Tanakh and also from this, the different apostles, at verse and who said it. The guy's amazing.
Joshua,
Yeah,
what today?
I miss studying with those guys who have an encyclopedic knowledge. I had a Talmud professor who was blind, and who could recite entire passages of the Talmud by heart.
Yeah.
He
My
was a
wife tells
Holocaust
me
survivor, actually.
My wife tells me I have a pornographic memory.
That's between you and her. Yeah, no, this guy, this Talmud professor I had a absolutely encyclopedic memory. He was blind. He knew the entire Talmud off by heart. He would say, start at the top of the page, and we would do 2 words, and he would say, ah, yeah, and he would recite the whole rest of it.
My Hebrew school teacher could do that too.
That's amazing. Apparently, he spent the war posing as a non-Jewish milkman.
Was he blind then?
No. And
That
then
that would have been
and then
interesting.
I mean, it was a crazy story because he survives the war. He goes to America. He goes to LA. He's not educated at all formally, although he's a brilliant Talmud scholar. And he gets a job stacking books in the library at HUC in California, in LA. And eventually they sort of realize that this guy is really knowledgeable. And they sort of, facilitate him getting a PhD, and he taught Talmud for decades. Yeah, fascinating guy. He was actually the guy responsible for blowing the lid off of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were held as they wouldn't release the text of the scrolls. We're not exactly sure sort of why, but they refused to release the scrolls. So they released a list of the words, and a list of the word that came before it, and a list of the word that came after it. And he and a graduate student put a computer program together and matched up the words and put the text together. And then they released the text, which you can now get on you can see it online, the whole thing. And as I've said before, the Dead Sea Scrolls are remarkable in their in the fact that they're completely mundane.
It was the Catholic Church who didn't want it publicized. They were afraid that there would be revelations about Jesus. And they didn't want that.
But there wasn't.
There wasn't.
And it was interesting that they found the scenes that were up in Masada also. And that they found some tablets supposedly of, their writings also up there.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, if people are going to bury documents in jars in cave X over here, they're doing it all over the place, right? And because that, just seems to be that was the thing. So likelihood is there are many, many more of them around, but dig in the right place and find them is the key. And then, what are you going to find, right? So yes, you could dig up the entire land of Israel and find 4 million oil lamps, but so what? What do you do then? It's all,
You rub them for the genie.
right.
If they look like Barbara Eden, that's fine.
Reference previous conversation.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's begin with our blessing for study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. All right.
Can we get the Torah on the screen?
Yeah, let me find it for you. So
Which
are
chapter?
I think we're chapter 14.
So,
I think so.
I think we started 14, actually.
Yeah.
But Joshua, son of Nun again.
There we go.
Thank you.
What's interesting also about Joshua, as we kind of think about it, is none of this material ends up as part of the liturgy. Right? As we looked at some of these prayers from Psalms and from Torah text and whatever. But none of this material particularly ends up as liturgy, as would make sense, because this is essentially a military story, right? I mean, there's nothing particularly poetic or inspiring in this text. It's much more of a story of a political conquest, a military conquest. But nevertheless, it's interesting that I guess it's also interesting that it's not something that is venerated particularly.
What about the other books? They're not either, until you get to Psalms and things like that. Song of Songs is
We've
referred.
got some stuff from Isaiah, some of the prophetic notions are there.
No problem there.
But you're right in that the majority of liturgy pulls from Psalms, Proverbs, or Torah. Yeah.
When was the book created?
Which book?
Joshua, if you take the secular view, I'm wondering, because it's they're writing after the fact. So I'm wondering how far after the fact.
We don't know.
Oh,
I mean, there are lots of people who have ideas, but the truth is that because it's a retrojected text,
there could be.
it's almost impossible to date it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure there are many, biblical scholars far more advanced than I am who will tell you that it has to be this date because of this and that. But truth is that we don't have like a date.
Mm-hmm.
We know that King David lived at this and this time, and it was likely that the Psalms were written around that particular time period. We don't have that for Joshua or the Torah, right? I mean,
Right. My thought is
we don't have the editorial notes.
right.
We don't have the editorial notes for the redaction of the entire biblical text, right? How the actual Bible got put together. We don't have that. We don't know what that is.
I mean, for Joshua, to me, it's military, but it's also property rights. And my thinking is, at the time, it was history, maybe at the time it was retrojected or put in. And whereas the books of the Torah contain laws that are still relevant and creation myths that are still relevant. Whereas this one, at the time, it wasn't relevant because people had moved on.
Yeah, I mean, it does read, well, the content is such that it probably would make sense that it was written for a group of people living in the land of Israel at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that does date it somewhere between the conquest and the sort of accepted establishment of the nation of the ancient nation of Israel, right? But that's a lot of time in between. Okay, so let's
we had gotten through the passages where Moses is ascribing the land, and then we moved on to Joshua, who's saying, this is how I would do it. That's my memory of it.
Right.
okay, so let's pick up then with verse 6. The Judites approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kizite, said to him, "You know what instructions the Lord gave at Kadesh Barnea to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me." So we did this piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of Caleb calling in his due, right? Saying, okay, this is what I'm owed. right? God promised me this. I did God a solid and was truthful, with the spies business. I'm calling in my favor here. I was 40 years old when Moses, a servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I gave him a forthright report. Why do we need to know how old he was?
Well, it establishes his credibility. He was there from the beginning. Right?
I think it establishes credibility, and I think it means that he was not a youth at the time.
Right, he's not a pipsqueak kid.
Yeah, he wasn't a kid, right? He was an adult.
It also establishes that he was probably born after the Exodus, if he's only 40.
No. He's 40 when God sends him to spy.
The spies, okay, so they were 40 years in the desert, so he must have been.
No. But the spy thing happens in year 2.
Oh, really?
But it happens twice, right? It happens the first time, and they come back with these reports, and then they learn they have to wander around for another 38 years and whatever.
Okay. So if he was 40 when he was sent out, he's 80 now, or close to it.
Yeah, so he's middle-aged. Ish.
Middle?
Well, I mean,
Guys.
I can hope, no? Middle age keeps advancing as I get older. No, it's not the way it works.
That means I'm still in diapers.
My doctor keeps promising me I'm young.
I'm not in diapers.
Not yet.
Because the developmental stages are the same. They're just in reverse. Okay, so he relates this whole story of his companions came back and they while my companions who went up with me took the heart out of the people. Wow, that's like an intense statement there.
What line are we on?
9.
8.
Well,
Well, we're about to start 9. Okay. In other words, it was because of my actions that we're here today. Okay, then we hear a little bit about Moses. On that day, Moses promised an oath. The land on which your foot trod shall be a portion for you and your descendants forever, because you were loyal to the Lord my God. Now the Lord has preserved me. He has promised. It is 45 years since the Lord made this promise to Moses. What does that mean?
45 years?
It means that we've now been settling. Sorry, Carly, go ahead.
I was saying he's been waiting for a long time.
Yeah. But we know the wandering was 40 years, right? So now it means somewhere in there between 5 and 7 years, we've been capturing and fighting this war. When Israel was journeying through the wilderness, and here I am today, 85 years old. Now, it's very interesting, these numbers, right? So while sometimes we talk about numbers being completely irrelevant in the text, and who knows, it could have been this, it could have been, we don't really know what the numbers mean. But here there seems to be this real focus on these numbers, right? I was 40, it's been 45 years since Moses made this promise. Now I'm 85 years old. Why? Who cares? Like, why? You know, what's going on?
It's proving that he should be diminished in strength. He contradicts that statement, you know, but by 85, he should be sitting in the equivalent of an ancient, rocking chair. But he's still, I'm as strong as ever, you know, don't mess with me.
Also, it's written so much after, so we don't know how much after. So now numbers mean something. It's not,
Possibly, yeah.
you know, that it's more relevant. I don't know. It's really interesting because the next line says, I am strong today.
Right. I am still as strong today as on the day that Moses sent me. My strength is the same now as it was then. For battle and for activity. What does it sound like?
Sounds like today people say, oh, I feel like I'm 20 years old. You know, people say that. I mean, it blows your mind, you know.
Right.
He's using steroids.
It sounds like somebody who's in their 60s trying to go downhill skiing again.
Right.
I got a guy who's 90 who does go skiing every week.
Right. Okay.
We know about that one.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's what I'm reminded of. I know, well, he's not around now, but I know of a Holocaust survivor that his last few years, when I saw him, he would kind of take my arm and go, you know, here, feel how strong. I'm still strong. I'm like, it was important to him. You know, he was, I guess, almost 90 or whatever. And I don't know, for some reason, you know, it was his strength that got him through the Holocaust, and it was his strength that's got him through his whole life. And he wasn't ready to give up. So that's what comes to my mind.
Right. That he's still a vital part of the community.
Right. In fact, this was when I taught at the day school, we would have Holocaust survivors come and talk to the kids. And Mr. Silberger came every year until he passed. And it's like, I just remember that. Anyhow.
Yeah.
But not only that he had the strength, but he had the strength to lead.
Right.
There's a difference, you know, being
Yeah, I guess both a physical strength and a sharp, mentally sharp still. That's what I think of strength.
So he's making his claim, and he's saying, you can't tell me that I'm old and that I don't deserve it, and that I'm too weak. I can do whatever I need to do. So assign me this hill country, as the Lord promised on that day. Though you two heard on that day the Anakites. So Anak is the Hebrew word for giant. So the Anakites are the giant people are there, and great fortified cities. If only the Lord is with me, I will dispossess them, as the Lord promised. So the argument that he's, I guess, arguing against is, look, you're an old guy, you don't have the strength that you used to, and you're going up against a huge adversary. And his kind of preemptive fight is to say, God made this promise. Yes, it was 40 years ago, but I'm as strong now as I was then. Kind of emphasizing how his strength was the one that saved the entire people then. And now it's going to save the whole people again, right? That's sort of, I think, what he's implying.
Was it his strength or his interpretation of what was at the promised land?
Sure. Take your pick. Either one works.
Hey, buddy, come here.
So Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Yefuneh, and assigned Hebron to him. By the way, go to Hebron today, it's no blessed place. It is not a fun place to be, I gotta tell you. To Hebron, to him as his portion. Thus, Hebron became the portion of Caleb, son of Yefunah the Kizite, as it still is, because he was loyal to the Lord, the God of Israel. The name of Hebron was formerly Kiryat Arba, was the great man among the Anakites, and the land had rest from war.
What part of the country is Hebron? North, central, south?
Middle
Okay.
north-ish.
In the hills.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been pretty decent land then.
I mean, it's certainly not desert. It's arable.
Exactly.
You've got water. It's certainly reasonable to have a city there. Versus some of the desert cities, which were reasonable then, but are not now. But wouldn't have been now if we were dealing with ancient technology anyway. You've got a number of cities in the Negev, ancient cities in the Negev, that there's no way they could have existed if the climate was the same as it is today. There's just not enough water, and there's no way of getting enough water. So, okay. So the portion that fell by lot to the various clans of the tribe of Judah lay farthest south, down to the border of Edom, which is in the wilderness of Tzin. Their southern boundary began from the tip of the Dead Sea, from the tongue that projects southward. So
The Jordan then.
right, so if you picture the map, right, you've got the end of the Dead Sea, which is now kind of the beginning of the Arava area, which goes really from the end of the Dead Sea to Elat, is that section. It proceeded to south to the ascent of Akrabim, passed on to Tzin, ascend to the south of Kadesh Barnea, passed on to Hezron, ascend to Adar, and made a turn to Karka. Now, I without knowing ancient geography, turn left, turn right, turn left, turn right, who knows?
Exactly.
But clearly this means something to the authors, right? The specificity means something to the ones who wrote it. From there, it passed on to Asmon and proceeded to the Wadi of Egypt, which is the boundary, ran onto the sea. And that should be your southern boundary. So it really, we think that's the Red Sea. So the boundary on the east was the Dead Sea up to the mouth of the Jordan. On the northern side, the boundary began at the tongue of the sea at the mouth of the Jordan. The boundary ascended to Beit Hogla and passed north of Beit Arava. And then, so, again, we're getting all of these different boundaries and this place and that place and this one and that one.
Just goes on and on and on. I mean, why not just draw a picture? This is
right. But in a sense, they are drawing a picture, right? Because if you are aware in your mind of where all these places are,
yeah,
it would be like us saying, okay, go from the Bayfront to Temple to your house to, the mall to, you can picture that in your mind as you go, right?
Right.
So,
Right, as I just, it just goes on and on and on, yeah.
Now, it keeps going here, and I'm not so keen to read through all of these different names and all of that.
Caleb comes into play.
Wouldn't all these names give us some insight into when it was written? Because, you know, the names of places change down through the centuries, so.
Sure. I mean, sure, as long as they're not retrojected names.
Yeah, true, yeah.
Come here, buddy.
Yeah.
You have enough 13 where Caleb comes back.
It gets interesting.
It gets interesting. Line 13.
Go ahead, Eric.
Go ahead, Sue.
Oh, line 13, Caleb shows up again, and it
Okay.
gets interesting.
So in accordance with the Lord's command, Joshua, Caleb, son of Yefuneh, was given a portion among the Judites, namely Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron. Caleb dislodged from there 3 Anakites. So Sheshai, Achiman, and Talmai.
So he is as
Descendants
strong as
of
it says he
Anak.
is, right? I mean, I was not sure if he's just one of these blustering old Jews who shows up at services. Right? You know, who you just don't want to mess with and like, fine, you want Hebron, get out of here. But he's obviously, he takes on 3 giants and doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, he's fulfilling his promises here, right?
Yeah.
He said, give me the land, I'll go in, I'll get them.
And he does.
And here we go. I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and furthermore, he has a daughter of marriageable age.
Yeah. So how many wives does he keep him busy?
So he says, I will give my daughter Achsa in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiryat Sephir.
Which I love. I assume you do this in Erie too. Kiryat Sephir is where it used to be. Look at the line before, right? Debir used to be Kiryat Sephir, and only the regulars know it's still called Kiryat Sephir, but it's not anymore.
Right. But we do that all the time, right?
We do that all the time. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's where the so-and-so was,
Yeah. That's great directions.
you know. And of course, his kinsman, Othniel, the Kizite captured it, and Caleb gave him his daughter in marriage. There's a problem.
There is.
What's the problem here? Nobody's asking her.
Why is that a problem?
Well, when it came to other biblical stories, Rebecca had to say yes.
Okay.
Yeah, true. True.
Rachel and Leah had to, I mean, you know, Rachel had to say yes,
Caleb is not a guy to be messed with.
clearly. So what does she do when she shows up, by the way? This is where it gets really fun.
Yeah, I love this. She dismounted her.
When she came to him, she induced him. And, you know, not exactly sure what induced him means. I don't know that that's actually accurate, but
My verbiage says she urged him to let her ask her father.
How about persuaded?
yeah. Basically, it was her idea to go ask dad for some property.
Probably seduced, but they didn't want to put that in here.
Why do we need to know that she slid off the donkey?
I love that.
because it's seductive.
Is that
She
like
means
Rachel falling
business.
off the camel?
Well, right. So it's not by accident, right?
It's there for a reason.
Okay. So what are we saying here?
She's a rugged woman.
Maybe she hasn't slept with him yet. I mean, she didn't go into a tent. She just arrived and got off her donkey.
Okay. So they
So-
haven't consummated the marriage yet.
Right.
She's shown up and she's gotten off the donkey. What happened when a biblical figure gets off her camel and confronts Isaac,
They fell in love and lived happily ever after,
right?
sort of. Well,
They go
that's
into the
different.
tent, right?
Right. They go into the tent and his problems are solved,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? He is comforted after the death of his mother,
Right.
right?
So is that how a marriage was considered to be an official act? Is it there, it's consummated and that's it?
Right. So there are, the Talmud lists out 3 different ways that you can create a legal Jewish marriage. You can create it with a document that says the 2 of us are getting married and here are the terms. You can create it with the exchange of a piece of property worth a minimum pruta, whatever. Or you can do it by saying in front of 2 witnesses, the 2 of us are going to engage in sexual intercourse for the purposes of establishing a Jewish marriage. And so you can establish a valid binding legal marriage in any of those 3 ways in the Talmud. The biblical text seems to be along those lines that says once she moves into the tent and they act as husband and wife, they're married. Right? Jacob, when he goes to marry Rachel, Rachel appears to him, he thinks it's Rachel in the veil.
Right.
It's really Leah in the veil, and he doesn't realize it until the next morning.
Right.
Maybe they didn't talk. I don't know. They weren't having deep conversation, I suppose.
That's where the term the unveiling comes about.
Well, that's where the term bedecken, veiling, comes about, actually. Because it's from that point that it's the groom's responsibility to veil the bride, so he knows exactly who's under the veil.
So he says, Veil, what do you think?
I'm still working on helping out here on the Hebrew. This seems like an important phrase for me to know, to be able to say, dismount your donkey.
V'titznach me'al hachamor.
Get off your ass.
It has so many uses, doesn't it, Brad?
Oh, that was so
Right.
good.
It's fabulous, right? Yeah. Zenach, it's like yeah, I'm not sure. It's like resting or you know. The implication is that she got off the donkey, but exactly the Hebrews, I mean, as it says here, the Hebrew is uncertain. Does your Craig, are you looking in you don't have ArtScroll, do you?
Oh, yeah. Let's see here. What verse are we on?
17, 18, 18.
17.
18. Since she took the initiative.
Well, Rashi says that she bent herself to fall at his feet. According to the Talmud, Ashok rode her wedding on a donkey to hint to her father that just as a donkey begins to bray when there's no food in a stall, a woman complains that there's no food in the house. When she saw that her father did not take the hint, she fell off the donkey at his feet. Caleb then realized that something was wrong.
Okay. Bit of a stretch.
You tell Rashi that.
Tell Rashi that all the time. I find when Rashi doesn't know the answer, really, he creates this kind of like, you know, linguistic gymnastics to get us there.
Interestingly, according to JPS, the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain, and some Greeks believe that he induced her, and it's actually misinterpreted.
That would make sense because the action is that she goes back and confronts her dad and says, hey, give me something.
Oh, get off your donkey.
The rest of the commentaries are in Hebrew with no vowels. I can't even read it with vowels, so I'm not even going to attempt that.
Where are you reading it?
In the, whatever the heck this is, the Sepharia. Yeah, Sepharia has 14 comments on it, but only one of them is in English.
Where do you get the comments?
If you tap on the passage, it brings the comments up on the bottom.
Oh,
Right, so
commentary.
it's verse, it's
Oh,
15,
look at
18, right?
that. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You didn't know that, Liliana?
I found it. Yeah, I didn't know it was there. That's interesting. Even Ezra is on here. Huh? He's always a good one.
Radak, my favorite. I lived on Rachov Radak.
Right.
No, he doesn't comment on that. Abarvanel, it's way too long.
Most of them are not the popular, like even Ezra or Philemon.
Yeah.
They're not on here. What about Nechama Leibowitz? She's always good.
Yeah, she doesn't comment on that part though. I just looked at it. Anyway, okay. Well, we don't have.
Sophie, come here. What are you?
Somebody has a research assignment.
Just to give you a little bit of what the art scroll says, it says that she had urged her husband to go to Caleb and he refused, so she went on her own. And then that's, I don't know what the name of that commentator is. And then another commentator says the reason is she knows her husband is going to be Joshua's successor. And so he needs to have, you know, a good land and a good place to, you know, to settle.
Protected fertile property.
Sounds like they made that up.
Yes, well, come on, it's Midrash. Yeah.
Right. So at one point, right. So she's given to, you know, Caleb gives her away to whatever is it, Othniel. Othniel. Right. Othniel. I can only do it in Hebrew. Othniel, and Othniel, the next thing you see is when she came to him, and we're not sure who the him is. right? Is the him Othniel or is it Caleb? Or is it, when she came to Othniel, she convinced him to ask her father for some property, period. There's an ellipsis in the text, and the next thing we know, she's there getting off the donkey, talking to her dad. She dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb asked her, "What's the matter?" She replied, "Give me a present, for you have given me away as Negev land. So give me springs of water." And he gave her the upper and lower gulot.
You can click on
This
it.
was the portion of the tribe of the Judites by their clans. And then it goes on. So the question that the commentaries are, I think, asking are, what happens between these two sentences here? The first part of 18 and the second part of 18. We're not sure. Right, we just don't know.
And
So-
why is it so explicit about she and the donkey? You know, why wasn't it just that, you know, and she came upon her father, blah, 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 you know?
Great question.
Is there a reason, as they said, you know,
Well, I can make you know, a connection between. We want to make parallels here, right? The whole text of Joshua is making legitimate parallels between these characters and the characters in the Torah, right? So, you know, we have Rebecca who comes to Isaac on a donkey, on a camel, and comes off the camel and creates peace in the home. Right? So now we have this other character who also is being brave, right? Just as Rebecca was brave going off to talk and to go and marry Isaac and do this crazy thing. She does the same sort of thing. She's willing to go and marry this other guy, but now she's going to come back to dad and she's going to say, okay, give me what I'm owed.
but again, you're making a distinction between a patriarch and his wife and, you know, a minor character in Joshua.
Sure.
So,
She's a minor character, but she's given this negative area, which is not minor. Like it's significant, I would think.
Well, are we on?
Yeah.
The footnote says when they describe Negev land as it's described as a dry land that is without a dowry. So he was she said, you gave me this worthless land, give me something, you know, I need water.
I need to make it work. And what's going to make the only thing that's going to make it work is the water. You know, I can't do anything with dry land. Right? You can't grow anything on it. You can't build a community on it. You can't have a city on it. You can't do anything. If it doesn't have water, you're done. It's useless. I mean, even today, you know, if you don't have water that is flowing into your settlement, you have nothing. I mean, you can't survive. There's no way that it rains enough to provide you with enough water to sustain you. So if you don't have a source of water, you are, as they say in the old world, aftzlachos.
So where's upper and lower Gilboa? We don't really know. So it must have been okay because they said that was given to the Judites.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know.
The footnote again says springs when they're talking about Guloth.
Yeah, those are probably individual springs.
Springs, right?
And there are springs throughout the Negev, right? I mean, now they're called something else, but there's Ein Avdat, Ein Akev, Ein Yaakov. Ein just means spring. Ein Gedi, which are these phenomenal freshwater water deposits. So then you go through a whole long list of places, which we're not going through.
Again, it's Edom again is in Jordan, what is now Jordan.
So wait, who is the tribe of Judites? Is this all of them?
Judah,
Judah.
Just Judah.
the tribe of Judah.
Okay. And why triplets?
Well, Judah was probably the largest. I mean, clearly here, the Judah is a very large tribe.
Yep.
Because this tribe has clan divisions as well.
But this is another instance that strikes me as the text converting to song or poetry or something.
Well, and it may also be converting to current reality when you had essentially two nations. You had Israel and Judah, right? Northern and southern kingdoms. So if you're going to focus on something, you're going to focus on the realities currently on the ground, right? Which is, why does the kingdom of Judah have this whole large area? Well, they were given this area, but they didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Then it gets really specific though, after
Absolutely.
46, it starts to get more specific. The towns in the vicinity of Ashdod and the villages and so on, depends on village, Gaza, Mediterranean Sea. Interesting.
And this becomes actually, one of the texts that is used by fairly right-wing folks in Israel as a way of saying this whole area should be ours. That God promised us this whole area. And therefore, we have the right to do whatever we want to do to hold on to that whole piece of property.
Yeah, it says here at the last line that, but the Judites could not dispossess the Jebusite, the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So the Judites dwell with the Jebusites in Jerusalem to this day. That's a big statement there.
So they couldn't get rid of them. And so they figured out some way that they could be in the same place.
So the Arabs could claim, well, we're part of the Jebusites. From their part, they could claim, I mean, so, I don't know.
Well, their narrative, it goes in a very different direction, right? Because their narrative doesn't follow this text.
No.
Right? Their narrative is that, they've been there since the creation, and these Jews came in and and actually the revisionary stuff that goes on now tries to sort of paint it as if essentially as if the Jews just showed up in the modern period. That there's no connection between what may have happened in the ancient world and the modern experience of Zionism.
Revisionist by whom?
Mostly by Palestinian, folks where they try to, sort of negate the Jewish foundation of either like the Kotel, the wall, or any of the sites.
They're trying to destroy all archaeological evidence they can. It was just a case.
Well, I don't think, I mean, they're not, so they just don't want to dig it up, right? They just don't want it there. So they've prevented any archaeological digging underneath the Temple Mount. They've prevented a whole bunch of, whatever, but it's a way to preserve their status quo, right? I mean, that's how that kind of functions for them. But it's basically denying the historical nature of Jewish presence within the land of Israel.
So what is the Western Wall?
Roman.
Yeah.
To them, it's a Roman building.
Well, in a sense, it really is a Roman building. I mean, it was built by Hadrian. It was a Roman, it was part of the Roman Empire. I mean, if you want to reread it, you can reread it pretty much any way you want. But, so part of the, so when some of these things come before like United Nations and whatever, they say they want to protect the historical nature of the Temple Mount, and they don't at all acknowledge the fact that this is a sacred Jewish location, that this was actually the former Jewish temple. They just mentioned the fact that this is the Dome of the Rock and the Alaska Mosque. Right? They don't acknowledge the fact that it's built on top of the ruins of the temple.
It's funny how the media picks up on that too. I mean, you'll see that in a description of the area or whatever, and they'll say all that about the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they say and it's also a sacred Jewish site. It's just kind of a footnote. Yeah.
Right. And there have been there were lots of conversations about, early on, and when Israel recaptured the old city, what do you do with the mosque? And they decided that they would actually leave the mosque in the hands of the Jordanian authorities. And so it's actually under the auspices of the Jordanian Waqf. And so when you're up there, you can actually, at least you used to, I don't know now, but you used to have to pay in Jordanian currency. I mean, they converted it to shekels too, but basically everything was posted in Jordanian currency.
There's nothing there to buy.
Well, they have to buy a ticket, and you've got to,
to get in.
Yeah.
I've been in the
and the museum. There's a museum that's there.
Yeah. I don't think you paid to get in though. You could just at that time you could just walk in. Took your shoes off and walked in.
When I went in the 80s, you had to pay to go in.
I don't remember.
If you were non-Muslim, you had to pay to go in.
Oh.
Yeah, but honestly, I haven't been there since 87.
Yeah.
And after that started the intifadas and everything else, and it just hasn't been possible, basically. And from time to time, we there's riots up there and all sorts of stuff that goes on. So different radical Jewish settlers, try to get up there and reclaim the Temple Mount and, essentially just cause trouble. And they try to go, whatever, and then the Palestinians get upset, and then the Jordanians get upset because it's a sacred space, and and then there's been other issues of them throwing stones down onto the Western Wall Plaza where the Jews are, and that's become a threatening experience for them. So it's a very contentious little piece of property.
But isn't it true that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is not that holy a site to them, but it's only because it's been contended by the Jews for that area?
Well, apparently it's a third or fourth in line of importance within the Muslim world.
It's pretty high up there.
So it's not
Muhammad-
insignificant. It's not the most important for sure. The Dome of the Rock is a shrine. It's not a mosque.
But the significance of the Dome of the Rock is, that's the problem, is you've got this rock and it's got this indentation on it, and the indentation is interpreted by Muslims as Muhammad takes his night journey on Al-Buraq, his winged horse, and he leaves Mecca and lands on the Dome of the Rock before ascending past the prophets to heaven. Now, the prophets are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Jesus, and so forth, on the way up to the true prophet Muhammad. But the little indentation on the rock is the hoof of Al-Buraq, the horse, right? It's also the indentation where Jesus was laid after they take him down from the cross, and it's the indentation where Isaac is bound and placed. And so you've got this rock with a little thing in it that everybody recognizes as being extremely, it just has meaning beyond meaning. So,
But to them, it wouldn't be, Eric, it wouldn't be Isaac, wouldn't it be Ishmael? Because they didn't think that Isaac was the one who was going to be sacrificed.
What I meant to say was
the Jews
from the Jewish perspective, it's Isaac.
Right.
So if you have Isaac laid here and Jesus laid here and Muhammad is slept here, it's to try and count is just the most important or least important. It has just significance beyond sort of historical important. It has meaning that makes it as this. I think, as Rabbi says, this very tiny little piece of property that is way out of proportion in its significance.
Somebody's called it the belly button of the world.
Yeah.
Hard to call it a puppet.
There.
Yeah.
The puppet.
There for sure. All right, folks. We wish you all Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you.
Try.
Carly, how's the baby?
Doing good.
Good.
Keeping me up.
Getting any sleep?
Sometimes.
Good luck.
And Joel, congratulations on your new head coach,
I haven't even seen who they got.
Brian Dable.
Oh, big deal that, he can't play for them.
They can develop a quarterback. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank